right, so again, today we are going to look at how you can bring additional data into your edge animation. You can bring that into Grasshopper to actually use real quantifiable data, give it some type of visualization technique, edit it with Illustrator, and then animate it in After Effects. Because most of you are focusing on climate data, what would be better than to go to the NOAA website, one of the more reliable sources out there for collecting data in regards to climate. So you can find precipitation, temperatures, look at that information in a variety of ways. So we're going to start off here. And this is just the ncdc.noaa.gov website. From here, you can scroll to the bottom and go to Climate Data Online. From here, you'll see that there's a variety of ways of looking at this data. You can use the search tool, you can look at the data from a map perspective, or you can look at it from a data chart, which is really what we want to do. So go ahead and select Data Tools. And from here, you can see how you can find this data. You can find it from a weather station. You can select a location. You can find this 30-year average or normals. You can look at it from a daily. There's really a lot of variety in which you can do that. So there's a lot of options for future projects as well for this. For me, I'm going to do the select a location. From there, you'll receive a map, or I guess not yet. For this, we want to look at monthly summaries. I'm going to go to, let's start off the state, Nevada. Well, maybe we want to do it by zip code. Or is it annual summaries? This sort of gets confusing a little. This is a zip code for Las Vegas, so. So it's nice, it finds that weather data or that station. So it looks like it's using this weather station. There's some others that are around, such as McCarran Airport, and some other places throughout the valley. But from here you can see I can choose a year. So let's start off. Wow, why does it only go up to 1956? Did I? Oops, okay. So let's try find a station. Find station. Enter this location. So I'll just again do Las Vegas. I'm just going to stick with here for now. And this will just give you a map. And then from here, you can actually pick a station. So in this case, I'm going to choose Las Vegas. So let's go to full details. Here we go. This is what we want. It's a little different. It doesn't look much, but it is. And then again, if I select the year, it looks like this doesn't have all of it. So let's find the proper station. I know McCarran goes back quite a bit, so this might be just too new of a weather station. So which one's this? This is the McCarran. Here we go. So if you scroll near the bottom, you'll find the McCarran one. You can see that this goes from 2016 to 1948, so this should be adequate for us. So from here, I'm going to start with 2015, just because 2016 hasn't fully gone through, so we'll look at 2015 first, click View Data, because we have such stellar internet, this is taking a little bit longer than it should. So from this, you can see that you're looking at the monthly data for the entire year. So month, January to December, as well as a summary. You can look at the temperature, so you can look at the average max, the average minimum, the average. You can look at precipitation, so the total precipitation, greatest observed, all that information. There's quite a bit, obviously, and we want to see it for these monthly values. So what we can do is for each year, we can click and drag to highlight everything. We'll even select the bottom summary. I'm going to do Control-C to copy that. And similar to what we were doing last week in bringing in data, we go to our notepad and paste it. You'll see here's your information. Go ahead and save it. Go to the desktop for now. I'll do climate data. I'll name this one just 2015. Okay, so you'll have to do this for at least 10 years worth. So again, I'm not going to go through the tedious task of copying and pasting 10 years worth. I've already got that information on my computer, so that way we don't have to waste time with that tedious task. We'll go ahead and open up Excel now. Wish I had that already opened. We'll just go ahead and create a blank new document. And again, just like last week, we're going to import this data. So if I go to Data, from Text, it's going to look for that file that we just made in the notepad. So there we go, 2015, import. So again, it's just showing that tabular data. In this case, you can see because the tab selected, it's not actually dividing this. This is all just one column of information. And that's because, in this case, the information is being separated by a space, not a tab. So if I click space, now you can see that all that information is separated correctly. So make sure you have that selected, that you can see them in columns in the screen. Go ahead and hit next. And again, this is where we filter out some of that information. In this case, I'm just going to worry about, let's go back to our browser, view this data. wait an unnecessary amount of time. It's so difficult to look at a one-page PDF with numbers. Okay, so for this case, again, it's just looking at all this data. I'm really only interested in the average maximum temperature throughout the year, as well as the total precipitation. So if I look, that's column 2, and then I believe it's column 14. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So again, we're only interested in the second column and the 14th column. So you go back to Xcel. So we don't need this first one. It's pretty easy to remember that the first row is January, goes all the way down to December, and then the total. So I really don't need that column. So I'll just go ahead and have that highlighted, choose Do Not Import column. I do want this column, but I don't want all those other columns. So that's pretty much all the way until you start to see these precipitation values. So I'll select those, Do Not Import, so skip those. And then I also don't need these remaining columns. Do Not Import, skip, finish. Hit OK. And voila, you have your average maximum temperature and then your average or your precipitation for that month. Again, starting at January to December and then the total. You're obviously going to have to do that for your 10 years worth of information. Again, I don't want to go through that task, so I'll open an Excel I've already made for this workshop. Hopefully it's already on my Google Drive. So let's look at climate data. We can get over. Okay, so in this case, I didn't bring in that total summary at the bottom, so that's going to add that second column. If you also decide not to do that, you can do a pretty simple Excel equation. You can do equals sum. You can see that the function appears, so go ahead and just double click that. It asks for the sum of which columns. In that case, this one. I guess we don't want the sum for this one. We want the average. So we'll do equals average. Double click that function. Highlight. Hit enter. Close it and hit tab. So there's your average. Sliding rule. So there's your average for the entire year of 2000. This one might be in 2006. And then I have 2007, 8, all the way up to 2015. What's nice is once you do it for one, if you just hover at the bottom right corner, you'll see that plus sign. So if I click and drag all the way to the end of my temperature, it'll just run that equation for these other columns, which is nice. Again, if you properly copy and paste this data from here to include this, you don't have to do this additional information. And the same thing with this, I'll do equals sum, just because I want to know the entire precipitation for that year. Hit enter, 1.7, all the way through. So again, this is another thing that if you go this route, you'll notice if I hover over these cells that it's not actually showing 4.51, it's showing the sum equation up here. If you bring this into any other document, regardless if it's Grasshopper or Illustrator, it's not going to read this data. It's going to read some weird function. But you can easily resolve that by selecting that row, right-click to copy, then you just have to right-click, paste special, and choose the paste values. So it's kind of weird just to embed those numbers, but now you can see when I hover over each cell, it actually has that value. So in the future, if you don't have that summary like you do in this chart where it has the total under each one, you would do it this way. So for the future, this is a good way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and open this one. So the other thing you'll have to do, you'll notice in this, that you're going to have your temperature and your precipitation right next to each other when you bring them into the Excel file, kind of like how I did in this first one. You can do this as soon as you import it, or you click and drag this to, looks like it'll, is it? So here's first year, so the 11th column, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11. Just because you want to separate your temperature and precipitation inside this Excel sheet, and that's for the purposes of Grasshopper. So the next one, you'll bring in the next year, shift them around. So again, that's going to be a little tedious, but necessary. So I'll go ahead and close this. So this is what you'll have at the end. So again, these first 10 columns are your temperature. These next 10 columns are your precipitation. Pretty simple enough. So let's go to Grasshopper now. And so now that we have our Excel sheet basically prepared, we can use the extension or plugin of gHowl to bring in that tabular data. So once you install that, you'll see you have your gHowl tab. Go to this first one and choose Spreadsheet Reader. From this, you'll see that it's asking for a path to the file. This is the Excel file that you just made. So I'll go back to my parameters, primitive, file path. I'll right-click, say set one file path. Find that Excel sheet. In this case, it's the climate data 2. Open. And because it's gray, we know it's working. So let's go ahead and look at the data, so the second output. As you can see, it's organizing it the same way. I'm looking at them actually in a row concept. So here's 60, 50. So this is looking at the average maximum temperature for January from 2006 all the way to 2015. And then, again, sticking with January from 2006 to 2015. So this first column is for January, the next column is February, goes all the way down. By the end, you see what those averages are, or the summary of each one. So again, that's the average for each month, and then the sum total of precipitation for those years. So just like in Excel, we want to separate our temperature from our precipitation in this case, because we don't want that data to start conflicting. So let's go ahead and delete that. The next thing you need to do is split that data. So if you go to Set, List, Split List, it's looking for this data, and then it needs to know where am I going to split that data. Well, I know these are in 10-year increments. So if I use a 10 value, you'll see now I have it just showing temperature, and then the B1 is just showing precipitation. So now that we have that data separate, we can start to visualize each one a little differently. So we're going to have to still organize this data a little bit more because this is showing columns of January, columns of February, March, and so forth. We actually want to look at them instead of by month, we want to look at them by year. So if I go to my tree and do flip matrix, in other words, flip that data, I can bring that into here. And so now it's showing, okay, here's all of 2005 or 2006 from January, February, March, April, May, all the way down. And then the last one is your total. So what you can do with that is, again, because I'm just going to look to try and create a bar chart in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and flatten this data. So now it's just all combined into one large data pool. We have the data there. So let's actually start to look at how we can visualize that as a bar chart fairly simply. So I can create a series of points. So try and think about how bar charts are created. I essentially have those columns. Let's change this display real quick. Shaded. Okay. So from this, I can create a series of points. So I'm going to start off by doing a series. I want it to start at the 0 point. It doesn't really matter where it starts, but for the purpose of this, it'd be easy just to start at the 0, 0, 0. The step size, 1, that's going to be a little too wide. I'll show you that later. And then the count, so how many values do we need? Well, if I hover over this, you can see at the very top it says 130. But I can't just drag that as my count. I can do that by looking at the list length component. So if you ever need to know how many items are in a tab in order to do something like this, always go to your list length. When I drag that into there, you can see it just spits out a number value. So in this case, 130. That's what I want, is my count. So now it needs, so now I have step size. So it starts at 0, has a 1-step increment, and does that 130 times. So you can see here's my value 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 129. So the next thing you need to do is go to your vector to construct a point. Oops. We really just want these to go along the x-axis. So if I drag these numbers into my x input here, you can see it creates all 130 points in that same sequence. The one actually doesn't look that bad. So this is how you can just start to organize it in terms of creating these columns. The next thing we have to do is actually give each one of these points a length or a distance that corresponds with its actual value. So in this case, we want to go to curve, primitive, line, SDL. And so again, the start point, so that's where each one of these points is. The direction, this is defaults to the Z axis. In this case, I want it to be the y. So I'll go to vector, vector, unit y. So you can already start to see it defaults to a length of 1. But for the length, we want to use our actual data. So again, I can go back to my flip where it's showing the flattened pool of data and drag that into my length. Let's go ahead and turn off some of these things so you can see it a little better. Obviously, some of those values are extremely small. If I hover, you can start to see it. Let's turn off the grid so we can see it a little better. So you can start to see, basically the larger columns are your total for each one of those years. But for the most part, it's showing that. So like I said, the spacing is a little too wide. We can obviously edit it in Illustrator, but we can also do that in Grasshopper by changing the step size in the series component. So if I do just 0.25, drag that into there, now you'll see that the scale is looking a little better. So that's pretty simple on creating this bar chart using that tabular data. Again, you could do this in Excel. I prefer my charts in this case to just be curves instead of the shapes that would be generated in Illustrator, but again, this is just giving you an option. And through Illustrator, creating this charts, it's a little bit more manually intensive, whereas this can be much more automated. You can make changes to your Excel sheet and then have that re-reference it, and then it'll all automate, which is nice. So let's just do one more thing for this. Or I guess, so this is just looking at precipitation. We still have or let's do one more thing with precipitation. So again, we have just these bars that show incrementally from this beginning of the year to the end, and then the total for that year. Maybe we want a visualization for just those end of the year summaries. So again, what I can do is I'm going to look at this data again. I'm going to flip that matrix again, but I'm not going to flatten it this case. So I want to pull out a certain piece of information. In this case, I'm only interested in list item 12 for each one of these columns because that's the summary. So again, I can go to set, list item, do list item 12, create a new one, a new sticky note as I like to say. And now you can see now I'm just looking at the total precipitation for each year instead of looking at all for their monthly values. And what's nice from here, I can use these to create another type of visual. So for the purposes of this exercise, I'm just going to create a simple circle. Again, it's just going to default over here. And now for the radius, I'm just going to use these values. And easy enough, now you have a circle representing each year for that total value. Let's turn that off. So again, just a simple way. I chose circle. You can choose a different form of visual. The point is that it's pretty easy to filter that information to focus on something. You could do it for a different time of the year. You could choose a different month instead of the summary and just kind of highlight some of that as well by changing your index items. So remember, 12 is the summary. 0 is going to be January. 1 is February. 2 is March. All the way to 11, which will be December. So let's turn our grid back on. So another thing, just to kind of keep it accurate, is we want to see what these columns are starting to represent. This is going to be pretty simple, so I'm not going to even try and bother writing a script because it's going to be so simple. I'm just going to create a polyline. It says be the base of my curve. Let's go ahead and click there. Hold shift to keep it orthogonal. I don't know why it's starting to lag really bad all of a sudden. So I'll just somewhere right around there. And hit enter. So again, this is just the base of our bar chart. If you wanted to, you can even go as far as animating this with Grasshopper. I don't think it has the necessary depth in order to rationalize that, but if you want to be ambitious, go for it. Okay, so I'm going to essentially make a 1-inch increment for this. In this case, it's going to be just 1, so I can do copy, make a copy from. It's really not liking this all of a sudden. So here's 1 inch, and if I do that once, I'll get a new thing from here, and it'll say from last point, let's say yes, and use last distance, so that 1, just to make it a little bit more mainstream or streamlined. Hit enter. So basically these are going to be, so here's 1 inch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain. Just so we make sure that those match up nicely. Because you can see this one's at about like 5.9 something, so it's just short of that. This will, again, keep it fairly consistent and accurate. So once you've done that, you can just go ahead and bake this. So I'm going to right click, bake. I'll just put this onto layer 1 for now. Preview. Now I can just go ahead and click and drag to select everything. Again, it's probably because I have Rhino running, Google Chrome. My drive is trying to sync another 1900 files, so that's probably all leading to a lag. But anyways, okay, so I have my actual vertical bars selected as well as these rows of the rain value. Now I can simply do File, Export Selected. It's on now. So how are you guys doing? Are you following up so far? What's up?
When I was trying to put the notes into Excel, I
Mhm.
did it in one column.
That's probably because did you choose the space as a delimiter? It should have been in like the second window once you imported from file or import from text.
It's funny, if I kept clicking down, I clicked selection or semicolon and comma and nothing happened. I was like, this is doing it.
No? Wow, this is obnoxious. I'm gonna have to. I think I have all the necessary Google Drive file synced, but who knows? The second column, so that was, again, like, I just did it to show, because I know people are looking at temperature and some people are looking at precipitation. You can make life much easier and just say, I just care about precipitation. In this case, probably the two of you are really interested in that, right? So that would be the 14th column, or the, yeah. No. You can, I'm sure enough, it's easy enough to remember the first one is January, February, and then the total. Alright, so in this case we're going to export it as Adobe Illustrator. I'll keep this again on the desktop, climate data, I'll create a folder titled Chart, and do zip chart. Okay. So do snapshot of current view, RGB. In this case, the viewport boundary doesn't really matter, so you can deselect that, hit OK. There you go, there's your chart of precipitation. You can do the same thing for your circles as well. So keep that in mind.